Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Naomi, and today I want to talk to you about meal prep. So meal prep, I sort of feel like is a buzzword within the, health and wellness community, mostly because I think that all of us want to know, most people anyway, particularly those of us who want to eat more whole foods and fresh foods and home cooked meals, we want to know how to do it in a shorter amount of time and in the easiest way possible. Because, first of all, like going out to eat can be really expensive, but also having a really good home cooked meal, there's nothing like it. Right? And it feels really good, I think, sometimes to eat food that you have made yourself, to feed your family with food that you have made yourself, and just to, use as much, fresh ingredients and, fresh food as possible in your daily diet. So we all want to know how to do that, but we want it to be easy. because like cooking takes time and it can be exhausting and frustrating and like not fun, especially if you're spending hours in the kitchen because like ain't nobody got time for that, right? Like most of us don't anyway. So I want to give you my top 3 tips plus a bonus tip for simplifying your entire meal prep routine. And I'm pretty sure that these might be ones that you've never heard before. So stick around. All right. Okay, so my number one tip for meal prep, really simple tip, is to start with the basics. Now, what I mean by starting with the basics is to really think about the foods that you eat on a regular basis, things that you eat, every day, things that are a part of every single meal or a lot of the meals that you have, things that you eat every week. Now, I want you to think like really basic, so it might be something like onions. It might be something, like you have chickpeas all the time, or, it might be something like that. For right now, while you're watching this video, all I want you to do is make a list of these things, right? Start to just write them out so that you have an idea of what these things are. If you are somebody who has kids and you're making snacks for them all the time, what are the snacks that you give them? Is it fresh fruit? Do you, chop up carrots for them, or cucumbers, or red peppers. These are some things that I do when my 6-year-old will deign to eat something other than, like pretzels. So, like what are some of those things that require prep? So it's not necessarily like the crackers or the bread or the things that are already prepared. I want you to think of the things that require you to do work in order to make them usable in the way that you need. Okay. Now, once you have that list, then you can kind of go through and, if you have those things in your house right now, or if you're about to go shopping, what you can do is, like you start preparing them in advance. And I'm going to show you some of the things that I have so that you have an idea of it. So for example, like we do use onions a lot. So I chop them up and I put them in a glass jar and they're good to go, right? Like I just leave this in my fridge, and when I need onions, I go into this container, or another one. If I have more than this is one onion in this container right here. Okay. If garlic is something that you eat a lot, ginger, you can do the same thing. I recommend freezing garlic and ginger if possible, because sometimes that helps it retain a little bit of its flavor a little bit better, because things can dry out in the fridge, particularly, juicier things. Onions stay pretty well for at least a week, sometimes longer. Like you can chop them up and they're still pretty good. Like they hang in there, especially if you're, not opening this thing too often. Other things that we do, I cut up carrots for my kids, and I put them in a glass jar and I put them in their lunch. So this is done, right? I do that with apples too. What I do with berries, see, I have my berries in a little bowl. I rinse them off first, put them in the bowl, and then when I'm ready to like give them for a snack, I can just like put this bowl on the table and I don't have to wash it. And I know that seems like a really small, maybe insignificant step, but it takes time. If this is just in the fridge and I can take it out of the fridge and like dump it into a bowl for each of them, that's like an entire minute or two that I've saved, okay, in my life. One of the other things that we use really often in my house are greens. And so that's another big thing that like I immediately do, when I'm doing food prep is greens. So I have 2 ways that I store them. Sometimes I store them in like old plastic bags that I keep that, I want to reuse as often as possible. So, I just tear them up. I'll show you. I tear them up into these like small bite-sized little pieces that I'm going to use, and then twist them up, use a clothespin, put them in there, put them in the fridge. I also have them also in glass. So, it just depends how much you use. We use a lot of them, and sometimes I have different kinds of greens, so I separate them apart. Do the same thing with watermelon and other fruits. So I chop it all up, put it in a container, and we're good to go. So whenever we want watermelon, I don't have to worry about like cutting it into pieces or anything like that. It is right there. So I look at the things that, that we are eating most frequently, and this is just sort of a selection of some of the things that we're eating most frequently right now. I look at those things we're eating most frequently, and I make sure to do those if nothing else. So your number one tip is to look at those foods that you are eating on a regular basis and start prepping those in advance so that you can grab them whenever you need them. So this works really well with snacks. This works really well with like things that are just foundational to the meals that you make, like onions, like root vegetables, like sweet potatoes or carrots or, potatoes, any kind of potatoes. Things like that work really well to chop them up in advance and store them for a little bit of time. So that's number one. Okay, number two is to start small when it comes to planning. So once you've gotten into this rhythm of prepping some of the like consistent foods that you eat, then if you want to be more prepared in terms of meals, like what am I going to be eating all week long, that's when you start asking yourself, okay, like how far in advance do I want to prep? And what's my goal for prepping? So, your goal might be, and this is sort of where you ask yourself, like, what is it why do I want to meal prep? What's important about it? Is it to, take the guess out of dinner? Is it to take the stress out of like what to pack, for lunch every day? Is it, or what to do for lunch for the kids? What's the thing that's really driving the desire to do more food prep every week and more meal prep. And that will sort of give you your next step. Okay, I think the biggest mistake that people usually make is they try to do everything all at once, right? They try, they say, okay, I'm going to start planning all of my meals every single day of the week for a week. And that's hard. If you're not a planner, and I have to say, like, I definitely wasn't at first. I was the kind of person who was like, what's in the fridge? I'll make whatever's in the fridge and it'll be delicious and it'll be fine. But that takes a lot more guesswork, right? Like that takes a lot more time, especially if you don't have things ready. So, if you want to be able to throw together dinner when you get home from work, or if you want to be able to throw together dinner and you work from home or you're at home all day or whatever it is, like you want to have those things prepped in advance, right? So that you don't have to wait like 2 hours before you come home, right? It also might be like, hey, I want meals over the weekends to be really easy because I want to enjoy my weekends. So it might be that, on a Friday night, you plan, this is what we're going to eat Saturday, this is what we're going to eat Sunday, and hey, bonus, this is what we'll eat Monday, so I don't have to worry about Monday also. So really what I'm suggesting is planning in chunks. Instead of trying to plan everything all at once, plan in chunks. Okay, so it's sort of like planning out 3 days at a time. Or alternatively, instead of planning entire days of meals, looking at the meal that you are most looking to like focus on. The meal that might be the hardest for you, the meal that causes you the most stress or frustration, and focus on that one for like the week. So you plan the entire week of dinners, or you plan the entire week of lunches, or you plan 3 days at a time that are particularly busy. Whatever it is, you plan those so that you have an idea of what you are going to make, and that will lead you into number three. Okay, and before we get to number three, I really just want to say this, that yes, if you are only doing 3 days at a time, it does require a little bit more consistent meal prep, like every 3 days, for example, right? Like it does require a little bit more, consistency in terms of like, oh, now I've got to go back to the drawing board. But it's a much smaller chunk to bite off than trying to do 21 meals or 14 meals like all at once, which can be a lot, if you're not that person, if that's not what you're wired for. So start small, focus on a couple of days at a time or a single meal for the entire week and go from there. Okay, that's number two. Number three is sort of taking from that, like you're sort of, it's almost like to be, is really to try to make your meals simpler by organizing your meals around just a few different ingredients. So instead of trying to reinvent the meal wheel every single night, think about like what ingredients can you use in a few different meals? Okay. So I want to preface this by saying I'm not the kind of person who meal preps by like making 5 meals on a Sunday for the entire week. I just don't do that. Like, I want to enjoy my Sundays. That would take the entire day. That would kind of take the fun out of it for me. I want to enjoy my Sunday. So I don't spend my entire Saturday or Sunday cooking. I make a different meal maybe every day or every other day, for the big meal of the day. But I look at it more as I want to prep ingredients. So once you've gotten those basics, right? Like you've already done your basics of onions or your basics of, the kale or the berries or whatever else, then it's like, okay, well, what are the ingredients that I want to use this week? Like, let me look at some recipes. Let me look at some things that I'm making. And can I use those ingredients in several different meals? So that if I'm going to do some prep, I'm like chopping a bunch of carrots and a bunch of tomatoes and I'm chopping, a lot of this, but I'm not shopping like 500 different kinds of things. I don't have to worry about like all these different ingredients. I sort of have it kind of, limited, limited to a very specific menu of foods. And that way I can concentrate and I can focus on these ingredients and not like worry about like, how much am I prepping or, oh, I need these really specific things. Like keep it really simple, right? As simple as possible. Okay, the simpler it is, the less work you have to do, which is, what you're after, right? So think more about streamlining your ingredients so that instead of making meals that have, like a really diverse amount of ingredients like every single week. So basically it's like meal on Monday has, like carrots and sweet potatoes and raisins and cauliflower. Meal on Tuesday has broccoli and, walnuts and like tomatoes and I don't know, I mean, cucumbers. Like instead of like making it all across the board with ingredients, pick a couple of ingredients each week to work with. And then the next week you can shake it up and try something else, but keep it simple, streamline it so that your prep every week is so much simpler. Okay, so that's number 3. Okay, now your bonus tip is this. Really basic. It's not really in the line of meal prep. It's actually in the way of giving you a little reprieve. And this is to make at least 1 or 2 nights a week what I like to call snack dinner. So snack dinner is like basically it's a no cook affair. You don't have to make anything necessarily. You're just sort of looking at things like hummus and salsa and peanut butter and, like it's sort of like make your own tapas kind of, like use tortillas and, pita bread and, like have fun with it, but, like make popcorn and make like little mini fruit salads, but it's not, instead of like thinking, oh my God, I have to make a meal, think of it as like, oh, I'm going to clean out the fridge a little bit. This is exciting, and simplify. Because if you are trying to make a meal every single night, it can be exhausting. And there are going to be some nights like that you might even have a plan and you're like, screw it, I don't feel like cooking tonight at all. And that's when snack dinner comes in. In fact, when you're doing that planning, if you start planning like your weeks at a time, so you've gotten really good at like planning chunks of days, like you're doing 3 days at a time and you're like, okay, now I'm going to do like 7 days. Build in at least 1 snack dinner. And my advice is to build it in on a night when it's already going to be a hard day, where it's already going to be a long day, where you've got a lot of things planned, or it's like you've got, like some meeting that you have to go, like some PTA meeting or something that you have to do. Like there's just so much going on that night. You're driving the kids everywhere, or, like you just know that when you get home, the last thing you're going to want to do is turn on the stove and make things. Okay, instead, if you can make a snack dinner a highly treasured ritual, then you take at least 1 or 2 nights literally off the stove, off the table, in a way that can kind of make it a little bit fun and enjoyable and less stressful, and maybe even make your dinner a little bit quicker, maybe even make it so there's less cleanup, right? Less things to, deal with afterwards. So snack dinner is sort of like my bonus tip secret weapon in my life and in my family for those nights that I just don't feel like making a meal. So those are my top 3 tips and a bonus for, making meal prep a little bit simpler, a little bit enjoyable, and, to try to add it a little bit more seamlessly into your life. So I would love to hear what you think about these tips. You can let me know in the comments below. You can ask me any questions about, how I do this on a weekly basis or, anything like that as well. If there's something that you feel like I've missed that you think is super crucial, put that in the comments below too. I would love to hear from you. And as always, thank you so much for listening, for hanging out with me here on YouTube, and for being a part of my community. I am so glad that I get to have this conversation with you, and I look forward to doing this more soon. All right, until then, bye.